Russia launched a massive overnight attack on Kyiv using hundreds of drones and at least 18 missiles. Multiple residential buildings across the Ukrainian capital were hit, with emergency services reporting multiple deaths and injuries. Ukrainian authorities say this is the biggest strike on Kyiv in almost 3 weeks, and they repeated their calls to allies to supply more air defence systems.
It's the early morning alarm that Kyiv residents dread. Strike. After strike. Moscow launched a major attack on Kyiv overnight, firing more than 400 drones and 18 missiles, according to authorities in the city. With the attacks still underway, emergency services rolled out. They found the destruction of buildings and lives.
When I got inside, I immediately realised what had happened. There were no walls, everything had collapsed, nothing was left. Later, when I went back a second time, I was told my mother was lying there. She died on the spot. My father also likely died on the spot as well.
Dog handler Maria Kalchenko narrowly escaped the blast.
I realised my hair was on fire. I could not hear or see anything, just a ringing in my ears. When I sat back, I realised the neighbour's wall was gone. My front door had been blown off and flames were bursting out of there.
This was just one of 30 residential buildings that were damaged overnight, according to officials. President Volodymyr Zelensky called it a deliberately calculated attack aimed at causing maximum harm to people and civilian infrastructure. Moscow denies targeting civilian areas.
Well, just hours after those overnight attacks, we heard from our correspondent Nick Connolly in Kyiv.
Lots of tired faces on the streets of Kyiv this morning. People going for a second and a third coffee because most people didn't get much more than a couple of hours at best of sleep last night. The air alert was more than 5 hours, and there was another one just before, kind of people getting up in the morning around 7 in the morning. And there was just a lot of noise. You could hear intercepts, you could hear things that probably were missiles hitting. You had lots of drones overhead being shot at with machine guns and other kind of lighter weapons. And it is just this thing that people here have got used to, that because Ukraine is able to shoot down a fair number of these missiles, Russia has to basically wait until it has a stock of missiles and try and overwhelm the system by sending in hundreds of drones. We had the president saying over 400 drones, and then those missiles to follow in the hope that some of them get through.
That's Nick Connolly. Let's pick up some of that with a military analyst, Marina Miron from King's College London. Welcome back, Marina. We just heard from Nick Connolly there. Russia appears to be stockpiling drones and missiles and then trying to overwhelm Ukraine's defences by firing them all at once. Is that now the sort of core Russian tactic?
Good evening, Phil. Well, this is nothing new. We have been seeing this happen in previous attacks where the Russians have combined decoy drones with real loitering munitions, with missiles, in order to overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses so that possibly more expensive missiles would reach their designated targets. And of course, given the fact that the numbers are growing, we have to take into account that the Russian production capacity has grown, and mixing these drones with decoys also makes it very difficult for the Ukrainian air defense systems, which are then overloaded, to know which are the drones that have a real danger of striking the targets, or which drones are made of styrofoam and things like that, because they have the same radar signature.
Right, and Ukraine has said repeatedly that it needs more Patriot systems and more interceptors. Is this becoming a sort of upward spiral where every time Ukraine gets stronger, Russia just launches bigger and bigger waves?
Well, Ukraine cannot cover everything with their air defenses or with the amount of air defenses it has now. And what Ukraine also needs are different kinds of air defenses. So small to medium range air defenses, such as IRIS-T provided by Germany, but also Patriot. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, we also have to think about how many batteries Ukraine has at its disposal and how many objects are there that need protection, because a radar, let's say, of a Patriot system will not cover 360 degrees. So you need several of those. So which components of air defense systems are missing? And also interceptor missiles, which are quite expensive, especially if you consider very cheap, maybe $10,000 decoy drones that Russia is sending out en masse together with their usual Iran 2 and Iran 3 drones. It becomes a very expensive venture for Ukraine to defend its critical infrastructure. And so the question is, are there more efficient ways to deal with a barrage of drones rather than using very expensive missiles? And that has been a discussion that Patriot, PAC-2 and PAC-3 missiles are just too expensive to use them on drones, even on the Grand drones and not on the Gerbera decoy drones.
Right, so if we come out of the skies and down to the ground, how stable are Ukraine's front lines at the moment?
Well, there seems to be a problem. Well, the main problem is around Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. The Ukrainian side is trying to create some sort of a corridor in Mirnograd to get the troops out. How that will succeed as the Russians are tightening their encirclement will remain to be seen. But there are also other directions which are worrying, and several Ukrainian MPs have also pointed that out, such as the Gulaipole region in a city in Zaporizhia, where the Russians are coming, and they have taken a few settlements. So those are not Russian reports. Ukrainian reports confirm that as well, which is very worrying. And of course, Russian advances in Dnipropetrovsk region, again, something that the Ukrainian side has also confirmed. So it seems that the defensive line in the Donbass for the Ukrainian troops is getting very shaky.
Right. Well, regardless of what Ukraine says it needs to fight off the Russian onslaught, everything seems to depend on whether Kyiv's partners are willing to keep providing that support. Germany says it's ready to put its money where its mouth is. We'll hear from their Defence Minister, Boris Pistorius, and then come back to you.
As far as Germany is concerned, I can say that we're prepared to continue to take the lead in supporting Ukraine. Yesterday, the German Parliament approved my proposal to expand aid to Ukraine in the coming year. This will bring the total to more than 11.5 billion euros in 2026.
Well, Marina Miron, that figure of 11.5 billion euros, that's 3 billion more than originally planned, with those extra billions dedicated to military aid. So what has been Germany's track record in turning its big figure promises into actual air defences and ammunition that Ukraine needs?
Well, it's a difficult question because on the one hand, Germany has been delivering, or at least partially delivering, what it has promised, but the problem is that there are different sources. So one source has been decommissioned equipment from the Bundeswehr on the one hand. On the other hand, some money would be allocated to Ukraine's purchases of US weaponry. And then we also have the German production. And so there are kind of different sources of aid that were coming into Ukraine. The problem with these is quality, and the quality has been criticized on many occasions by the Ukrainian armed forces, such as the quality of Leopards that have been delivered to Ukraine. The other thing is the timeline. How quickly can you turn that money into actual capabilities? So the delivery timelines have not always been met. And so if Germany pledges to deliver, say, IRIS-T air defenses to Ukraine along with interceptor missiles, then it's taking too long for Ukraine to wait until it gets a complete delivery, and not all of the pledged IRIS-T systems have been delivered to Ukraine. And the last issue is the fact that how much equipment can that money buy, meaning that the amounts are enormous from what we have heard, and now Germany is pledging to invest 3 billion more. But how would that look in actual equipment? Because the equipment that Ukraine would be getting is quite expensive, so it's a lot of money. But in terms of getting the necessary amount of equipment, it doesn't match with what Ukraine might be needing.
OK, thanks for talking us through that. As ever, we thank you so much for your insights. Marina Miron from King's College London.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's military says it carried out drone strikes on the Russian port city of Novorossiysk on the Black Sea. Videos on social media appear to show the aftermath of the attack, which local officials say damaged an oil terminal. Several residential buildings were also reportedly damaged by drone strikes. Russia's defense ministry says it intercepted more than 200 Ukrainian drones. For some more analysis, I'm joined now by Domitilla Sagramoso, a senior lecturer in security and development at King's College London. Good to see you, Domitilla. So Ukrainian infrastructure obviously took a big hit last night, but Kyiv does now also seem to be stepping up its counterattacks on energy facilities inside Russia. Can you tell us more about those?
Yes, as you mentioned in your report, there was an attack at the terminal at Novorossiysk. It's a very big terminal. It carries also oil from Kazakhstan through the CPC pipeline, also oil potentially from Azerbaijan. And this is one of the many that have been hit by Ukrainian drones and missiles. We also had a couple of weeks ago a hit on the terminal in Tuapse, which is further south, also an important oil terminal which belongs to Rosneft. And this is having an impact. All these attacks on oil refineries, oil terminals, fuel depots, also pipelines, they're really having an impact in the ability of Russia to sort of function and export its products. And there is evidence apparently that almost 17% of Ukraine's oil refining capacity is now challenged or under threat of operating effectively. If we think, for example, of Novorossiysk, the figures that I found is that, for example, from the oil that comes from Kazakhstan, it's around 1.3 million barrels a day. And the hit has resulted in a 2% increase in oil prices. So this can have an impact not only inside Russia but also globally at this moment. But it's certainly quite efficient.
So tell us more about the weapons that Ukraine is using for these strikes. I mean, are they getting better armaments from their allies, or are they now building their own better long-range offensive capabilities?
Well, in the past, the Ukrainians have relied very much on the so-called, the famous, American ATACMS, which were, launched from the HIMARS. But the Americans have not delivered so many as of late. And instead, we see, for example, the Brits coming in with the Storm Shadow and the Scalp, the French missiles. Very recently, the Brits provided another batch. And these are very effective, of high precision missiles that can hit behind enemy lines, deep strikes, apparently around 155 miles. But Ukraine is also developing its own systems. We have the Neptune anti-ship missiles. Originally, they were designed for anti-ship, so to hit at ships of the Russian fleet. But now they've also been used against, for example, potentially oil terminals. It seems that a Neptune missile was used, but it's not 100% clear. And also the Ukrainians are now developing the Flamingo missiles, which also are able to hit quite behind enemy lines. They are not as far, as the so-called Tomahawks, but still they can go as far as 600 miles. So they can hit, quite far behind. And also, of course, they're using drones. drones. You know, the drones are slower and they may carry lower payload, explosive load, but they still have an impact, and they can hit, for example, at pumping stations. This happened in the Druzhba pipeline, for example. So we see that it's a variety of instruments. There can also be sabotage, by infiltrators who are operating inside Russia. They can also carry out explosive operations and try to operate. And this explains why the Russians are trying to bring in their reserves to protect many of these strategic, economic energy infrastructure.
Domitilla Sagramoso from King's College London. Thank you so much, Domitilla. Let's get the very latest from DW's Nick Connolly, who is in Kyiv. So, Nick, after those major attacks, give us a sense of the situation there this morning.
Certainly, Anya, lots of tired faces on the streets of Kyiv this morning. People going for a second and a third coffee because most people didn't get much more than a couple of hours at best of sleep last night. The air alert was more than 5 hours, and there was another one just before kind of people getting up in the morning around 7 in the morning. And there was just a lot of noise. You could hear intercepts, you could hear things that probably were missiles hitting, lots of drones overhead being shot at with machine guns and other kind of lighter weapons. And it is just this thing that people here have got used to, that because Ukraine is able to shoot down a fair number of these missiles, Russia has to basically wait until it has a stock of missiles and try and overwhelm the system by sending in hundreds of drones. We had the president saying over 400 drones, and then those missiles to follow in the hope that some of them get through.
How are Ukrainian air defences holding up under, this kind of onslaught?
I mean, if we've got the numbers now from the authorities, they say that of those drones, more than 400 of 430 were shot down, around 405. As for the ballistic missiles, more than 2/3 of those were intercepted. That's the official information we have this morning, and certainly it did sound a lot like intercepts. And if you look at the pictures of lots of the damage, it does look like shrapnel or kind of bits of missiles that coming down that have been intercepted rather than direct hit and then doing damage to cars and to houses and to apartment blocks. But it is obviously always a struggle, and there is a real fear here about running out of the ammunition to keep these Patriot missile systems working. That is the only game in town for dealing with Russian ballistic missiles, and we know the only provider of those missiles, the only manufacturer, is the US. And obviously, European money is now being used to buy those interceptor missiles. But if the Americans decide they have other priorities, then people here in Ukraine are going to be a lot less well protected than they are right now.
Kyiv's mayor, we're hearing, Vitaly Klitschko, is warning of possible disruption to power and to water supplies. Just tell us a little bit about how vulnerable Ukraine's civilian infrastructure is as winter is obviously getting closer.
I mean, the situation here wasn't great to start with, right? That is not a secret to anyone. This is, another winter where Russia has been attacking the energy grid and the distribution of electricity. That is something we've been dealing with. People have been seeing, pictures of Ukrainians left without power for many hours a day, a couple of hours on and then back to power cuts. Usually that improves a couple of days or a week after the last big attack because the network is repaired just in time for a new Russian attack. But I think what we've seen here, particularly over the last 24 hours here in Kyiv, is an attack not just on electricity, but also on the heating supply. Unlike other parts of the world where maybe people have their own individual gas boiler at home or other ways of heating their home, electric heaters, for instance, here you have centralized warm water being sent around through pipes to heat huge apartment blocks where you can't feasibly each have your own boiler on the 20th floor of such a block. And so, once those systems are taken out, it is very difficult to repair them, even more so if the temperatures are colder than they are right now. If those pipes were to freeze, then basically you have to start again. And there is a real sense that Russia has done it before, but this time they are being more persistent and more aggressive at trying to basically create a kind of collapse here for civilians in the hope maybe that, the Ukrainian voters will tell, President Zelensky it's time to do some kind of deal, even if it's on Russia's terms. I guess that has always been the expectation from Russia. They haven't achieved it yet, but this year they are going at it with a lot more intensity.
And it's not only Kyiv, is it? I mean, there are reports of attacks beyond the Kyiv region as well. Just tell us about those, if you could.
So the focus was in Kyiv and around, but certainly other parts of the country have been hit. We've had reports of a town near Odessa with drone attacks on a market there and casualties reported. We're still waiting for more detail on what exactly that was. And similarly, near Sumy, which is up on the Russian border, northeast of Kyiv, a Zircon Russian missile, like a hypersonic missile, reportedly hit there, reported only to have hit a road rather than an obvious target. We don't know a lot more. Not clear why such a kind of high-tech rare weapon would be used against that target there in Sumy. But certainly that is just a reminder that the Russians, I guess, are also hoping that after a night like that Ukraine's defences are worn down and that it will be easier to get past the defences here. And sometimes that does end up working. However good a system you have, there is no full guarantee, no full 100% golden bullet protection against these attacks. I think certainly when you talk to kind of foreign analysts, they are usually quite surprised at how effective Ukraine has been at using what it's been given and about making every interceptor count. But there are also times when the people here will tell you off camera that they just have to make decisions and sometimes let missiles pass.